Welcome to the Pod Like a Girl podcast with your host, Mia Findlay. This podcast is all about exploring and celebrating women's stories, voices, and experiences through bold and unapologetic conversations. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Pod Like a Girl podcast. However you found us, whether through my TikTok or Instagram, or if I just happen to drop into your podcast feed, I am so stoked that you're here. This first episode is going to be a little bit of an explainer as to how we got here and why we got here, why this new podcast exists. And we're going to be putting out episodes fortnightly. That's because I have another podcast, which I co-host with my amazing co-host Holly, called Beyond Body, which is all about mental health, specifically eating disorders, and just the general messiness of being human and embracing all of those layers. But this year has changed a lot in my life, professionally, personally, but particularly my life online and the things I'm talking about, the platform that I have found myself accidentally building over on TikTok, speaking specifically about the things that we're going to be covering here on this podcast. And when I tell you that we already have the most incredible guests lined up, I am not exaggerating, can't give too much away. And we already have an episode which went up on the Beyond Body podcast, which I'll also be uploading here, which is with the amazing Paige Connell, also known as She Is a Page Turner, over on TikTok, all about the mental load that women experience. So that's a repost from our Beyond Body podcast, but that'll kind of get you going and give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So as I said, this episode is a bit of an explainer for how and why. I've been on the internet for 11 years, started out at 25. On the very first day, I went to my psychologist to receive treatment for my eating disorder. I had been diagnosed with anorexia binge purge subtype by my GP just a couple of days beforehand, and I was incredibly fortunate to first and foremost receive the treatment I did from my GP, and then to be put in contact with the incredible psychologist I then worked with. And for my own sake, I just wanted to mark the occasion by filming something quickly on my iPad before I left, because I'm tired of it. I'm so tired of feeling tired and feeling hopeless and feeling alone. And it really gave me a sense of being able to see my progress as I continued to come back and make videos, really just for my own personal use. But as I ran out of space on my iPad, I then put them on YouTube, never believing for a second anyone would be interested in watching my horribly low quality videos. But with time, people did find those videos and started to reach out and share their own experiences, particularly with treatment, particularly with trying to get better. And it wasn't good. It was abysmal. They were telling me stories about how they couldn't access treatment, or if they could, that it was woefully inadequate. So I started looking into it and found out that eating disorders in Australia at the time had the highest mortality rate, which they still do, and the lowest funding, which is improving, but it had been like that for a long time, and it remained like that for a long time. And more so than I was outraged or hurt or horrified, I was baffled. That didn't make any logical sense to me. This would continue to be a theme in my internet career right up until this year. That equation didn't seem to be making sense. The math wasn't mathing. How can something have the highest mortality rate and the lowest funding and remain that way, and to have so few people talking about it? And when they did talk about it, just to be talking about it in this very surface, dismissive, really unproductive way. So I kind of switched my online content from just sharing my experience to highlighting these disparities, discrepancies, failures of the system, then highlighting things like diet culture. And my recovery was going, fortunately, really well. And so basically my whole platform then just swiveled around to focus on advocacy.
Oh, Mia, thank you for joining us and for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It must have been an incredibly difficult decision to start sharing your own battles so personally and so bravely and so publicly like that.
And I started working in the space in a more formal sense and was appointed as the ambassador for the Butterfly Foundation, which is Australia's leading eating disorder body. And I've been very proud to be working alongside them in these areas for many years now. And then I discovered that there was a professional space for me. I never really had any interest in becoming a psychologist or a dietitian, and this new role was being created within the outpatient spaces of eating disorder treatment, which was eating disorder recovery coaching. So I was accredited by the Carolyn Costin Institute and started my business Beyond Body.
Her global business and popular YouTube channel help her provide the same support for sufferers that she once needed.
Every time I help somebody, it's kind of like I get one against the eating disorder. It's sort of the eating disorder took a lot from me, but all these years later, I've ended up taking a lot more from it.
I had started the business. My online life was really geared towards mental health, eating disorders, etc., and has been like that, like I said, for about 10 years, bringing us up to 2024. And as part of that role and as part of that work, obviously that intersects with themes of feminism, lots of intersectionality as far as marginalized people who are really left behind by a lot of these systems, particularly health systems, mental health systems. So I was touching on some of these other things that I'm really passionate about, but it wasn't really the driving force of my message. And then we come to 2024. And an incredibly tragic event took place in Bondi, Westfield earlier this year, where a man murdered women at Bondi, Westfield in a stabbing attack. He targeted women. And this is not, unfortunately, an anomaly in Australia. We have absolutely infuriating, unacceptable rates of domestic violence, more broadly, violence against women, women losing their lives, particularly to partners and former partners, and a pretty woeful, consistent response or non-response from our government, regardless of who's in power. It's just shades of unacceptable. The media, how appallingly they often choose to cover these stories. As a response to that particular attack in Bondi, I have no idea why, but I expressed my very intense feelings of, yes, sadness, but anger. I was incredibly angry. And I put that into words in a poem, which I then shared across my social media, and it got picked up and went viral, but it also got picked up by the media. You tell us be cautious, and we've tried it all. That I'm in a cab message, that I'm home safe call. We cover open drinks of girls we don't know, cross streets and fake phone calls so we'll be left alone. We stay home with our partners because surely we're safe, but where nobody's looking, one of us dies every 5 days. And I had obviously been an advocate for a decade in feminism adjacent areas, even though I am an absolutely staunch feminist and a passionate feminist. It wasn't something I'd really publicly stepped into. And this kind of pushed me into that arena. And more so on TikTok than, say, on my YouTube or my Instagram, I really started to engage with women and listen to their stories, because the reason why I'm passionate about trying to create these platforms where we can have these conversations is because I am aware of the enormous amount of privilege that I hold and am the recipient of from a multitude of factors. I am white. I am a woman who has the means to live my life the way that I want to. I describe it as being in Barbie land. I have designed my life so that I basically live in Barbie land. I work for myself. I answer to nobody. I conduct my life the way that I want to. I design it that way. And there's also obviously the areas of privilege which have been only given to me by birth that also mean that I feel like I have a duty to use that in some way that is bigger than me. And have just over the last few months since posting that poem kind of found my way into this area of advocacy and have found this unbelievable community on TikTok of mostly women, some allies who identify as male, not as many as I'd like, and also have some interesting interactions with men who definitely don't consider themselves allies, or if they do, they're not doing a great job of it. And discovered I have a lot to say. And not only do I have a lot to say, I have a lot to learn. And I have the opportunity to learn from some pretty incredible people in my audience, and also people who know a lot more than I do and who really, deserve to be heard and should be heard. And that's my goal with this podcast. That is what I want this space to be, is, yes, for us to discuss the dark and the terrible and the unacceptable, domestic violence, violence against women more broadly, relationship dynamics which are dangerous, all the way through to really highlighting a much more diverse array of female experiences and women's lives that we don't see or hear about, because it's not profitable to most people to sell us those stories and to show us those stories. And to see all these unique paths that you can take. I learned so much from my eating disorder and my recovery about conditioning. I had been conditioned for so long to believe certain things about my body, to believe certain things about what it took to belong, to be loved, to be worthy, to be successful, to be purposeful, to be peaceful. And so much of it was bullshit. So much of it was conditioning. So much of it was this ever encroaching set of walls and ceilings and floors which were just making me smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and more miserable. But I was in the box. I was where I was supposed to be. And the best thing I ever did for my recovery was break out of that box. Break out of convention, break out of standards, break out of what everyone tells you is safe. You're not safe confined in a box. You're not safe being repressed, being told this will make you happy, and you'll believe that as long as you keep telling yourself that over and over and over again. So yes, I want to challenge the areas and the experiences that we have as women that are unacceptable, but also to highlight and provide paths that maybe you never would have considered for yourself. Because that's when I said, my life has changed a lot online. It's also changed a lot professionally and personally this year. That's been a big part of my personal experience this year, which I am so grateful for, particularly for that community that I've found and built on TikTok, because I'm going to be sharing some of that too. My decision to go child-free, to explore these facets of myself that I've been really stuffing down and ignoring because of the things I think I should do, or I've been told will make me happy or make me feel purposeful or fulfilled. And I've learned so much from some of the women who we'll be hearing from, but particularly from the audience, the community. And so this is a really symbiotic relationship we're going to build here between you, me, the people we have here to be so generous with their time and their wisdom. And I'm just so excited. I have such a passion for the work I do. Obviously, I was fortunate enough to save my life from an eating disorder. So I will always be passionate about that. I love that work deeply. And I feel similarly about this. I am nothing other than lucky to be in a position to be able to hopefully lend a voice to somebody or have somebody out there listening feel heard by something we get to do here. So that's the very short inaugural episode. They will not be this short. In fact, you'll probably beg for the days when there were 10, 15-minute episodes in your feed. There is so much to come. This is such a new era for me, and I am incredibly grateful to have been given this new direction. I just feel like this whole door has opened and all this light is streaming in into my already very lit house that's full of sunlight, and now there's this new source of light that's so exciting and so incredible. And you'll really get over me using incredibly lame metaphors and analogies because it's like my second language that I cannot stop. But like I said, I will be popping up the episode with Paige Connell that was over on the Beyond Body podcast, so you can have a listen to that. That went up there a few weeks ago, but it's very relevant to what we're going to be talking about here, so that'll be a double up that's here too. If you've already listened to it on Beyond Body, I apologize. It's a good one. Take another run at it. And we will have some really, really cool stuff coming up with guests. We'll also do things like, if you want to send in questions, if you want to send in podcast ideas or guest ideas, we have that option on the website, podlikeagirl.com.au. There's a whole form there where you can put in your ideas, suggestions, questions, guest recommendations, whatever you like. I mean, you can put guest recommendations in there. I cannot promise you that anyone's going to, put people who I can reasonably ask to be on the podcast, please. So you can interact with us there. Obviously, you can interact with us if you're listening on Spotify as well, and give us your thoughts and your feedback and what you'd like to see in this space. There's an Instagram account too, Pod Like a Girl Podcast. All of this stuff is going to be in the show notes. And I will look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks because we'll, for the most part, be doing video and audio. And I'm just so excited for what's to come. Thank you for being here for the start of the journey.